Well, good morning. We're going to not be as long this morning because we need to get upstairs and get started with the chrismation of Angela. So perhaps this morning, let's focus on finishing the foundation of what we've been getting ready to build. And then once we've got that finished, we can start climbing. So, what were you doing last Sunday about this time, Megan?
I was here.
What were you doing? Remember?
Writing.
You were doing theological ontology. What is theological ontology? Who cares? You're doing it. This is what we're doing. Theological ontology. We're pondering. We're listening very hard, as closely as we can, to the evidence and the witness of Scripture and the Church, in order to understand the mystery of being from the perspective of God, not from human perspective, but from the perspective of God. So it's theological anthropology. Theological anthropology. Ontology is what we do also do, theological anthropology. So we have established in our understanding, I hope, that from that seeing the world from its biblical revelation, that the creation is not rooted in chaos, this undifferentiated mass. So the world is not just this chance kaleidoscopic arrangement of atoms, but that the world is personal. It is grounded not in the what, but in the who. We demonstrated last Sunday and the Sunday before that as well, something about the mystery of the who. We asked Megan to tell us who Dan was without telling us what he was. She could not tell us what he was. And you remember, she could not do it. Have you been thinking about that all week? How you might tell us who Dan is without telling us what he is? Because it just emphasizes the fact that if you do, you just can't do it. Yeah. Now, what does that say? What does it tell you about? What does that tell you about whether you're going to how are you going to discover God? How are you going to discover God? How are you going to decide what are you going to tell Alfie? How are you going to tell Alfie what it's all about? Why is it that the question of God is so wide open, and there are some who believe it, some who don't? Why? You start to get it? It's because everybody's approaching God as a what? They're trying to understand, they're trying to find God as a what? And so you get caught in this scientism, the scientific religious kind of mind, this religious philosophical kind of mind, that thinks that the mind can grasp everything because the mind is of the same essence as the stuff that makes the universe to be what it is. And so therefore with the mind, I can grasp, I can see, comprehend the one from whom all things proceed, from which all things proceed. But you understand, we treat the one, the source of all things, as a what? Okay? So this little exercise that we did, trying to tell who then is without telling it, without reducing him to a what? You couldn't do it. I mean, it tells us what does it tell us, you know? So if we're going to find God, no wonder the world is the human understanding, the history of human thought, no wonder it is so conflicted over the question of God. I mean, it's a very simple thing, is it not? I mean, you saw it, you can see it, it's right in front of you. But you see what huge implications it has for understanding yourself, understanding the world, understanding where you came from, understanding the meaning of it all. It has huge implications. We're all looking over here, and it's not over there. It's over here, in the who. So, this is why I find this so exciting. I'm very excited about this revelation that comes to us from the church. It excites me tremendously. To me, it answers so many questions. So this is what the world is. The world is grounded in the who of God. First of all, the world is grounded. Let's see if I can stay in the frame. First of all, I'm going to let's go over this again and drive it home. The world is rooted not in chaos. And I'm going to put the root up here. The root is Christ. And who is Christ? Is he created or is he uncreated?
It's begotten.
He's uncreated. Yes, he's begotten because he's from the Father, but he is uncreated. So he is, if this is the created realm, Christ obviously is not there. He's here, as it were. Do you remember? So, catechumens, we were talking about, we have any catechumens here? Well, Ben. Not officially, I don't want to get you nervous. Not officially. But remember, the first controversy, the first ecumenical council at Nicaea was over Arius, and over the teaching of Arius. And Arius was teaching that the Son of God, Jesus Christ, is the first creature that God created. That's huge. Because if the Lord Jesus is a creature, that means that he's down here, and God is here, and there's no connection. God can tell us about himself, but again, can he ever tell us who he is? I don't think God can even tell us who he is. Because, you know, the supreme act that God spoke, even perhaps, and obviously the creation had to be there in order for him to speak this word. And the creation, the word that he spoke, the creation, that by which he spoke the creation into being was a big word, but I mean even bigger than that, the supreme word that he spoke was not a word at all. What do you think that word was? You know what it is, but what was it? He bowed his head and died. He didn't say anything. That was the word. And in that, he was manifesting, well, what he was, you could say, he's man, but more than that, he's manifesting who he was. And he didn't say anything. This is the beauty of it. So in the Arian scheme, there's no connection between us and God, none. And we cannot know God except in terms of what he is. And so in the Arian scheme, which is very similar to Islam, you're going to create a huge body of philosophical thought, and it's all going to be about what God is. but do you really ever know God? See, this is why it's so big. So, if Christ is uncreated, but he's also the root of the creation, what are we going to do with this diagram here? We can't leave it like this. What happened to my eraser? You see what happens? I don't even know how you do this. Oh, no, I don't. But this is how it's got to be. The creation, we'll have to think about how to make this diagram more accurate, but you get the idea. The creation is rooted in that, in him who is beyond the creation. So that the root of creation is outside of creation, if you will. It's beyond itself. This gives even more oomph to the story of the Murberries coming to the tomb of the risen Lord. They're coming to the awesome mystery of God resting in his Sabbath rest, which turns out to be the tomb. That's God resting in the tomb. Except when they come, he's not there anymore. Because he's risen. And you remember what it says? That fear seized them and laid hold of them. And it threw them into an ecstasis. That's the Greek word. The English doesn't really have a good way to translate that. It says they were amazed, or they were astonished, or something like that. But the verb is they were thrown into an ecstasy. You know, ecstasis. They were placed ecstasis. They were placed in a place where they're standing away from themselves. You know, they were taken outside of themselves, but in being taken outside of themselves, they were not taken outside of themselves. If you understand what I'm saying? In being taken outside of themselves, they were restored to their divine root, who is now risen from the dead. And this is the beauty of it. In his death, God has descended down into our stuff, and even into, you know, the ultimate the ultimate mystery of ourselves, that we have died we've separated ourselves from God. So he has descended into the lowest part of our being, and he has united himself to us at that point, and then he has raised us into his divinity. And in having raised us to his divinity, he has raised us to our true origin. So you exist, I exist, we all exist, not in ourselves. We don't exist even in the creation. Ultimately, we exist outside of ourselves, in God. And I want you to see how this sets forth within us. It presents our being, our being, not as a static, just something, a lump, a being that just kind of sits there, but rather it shows that our being itself, that what we are, is itself a movement. It's a movement. It's a movement that is wanting to get outside of ourselves, into the other. And what did we say this movement was this last summer?
Eros.
Erotic love. We exist in erotic love. So you could say that erotic love is the very stuff of our being. It's what we are. Erotic love is what we are, but because it's what we are, it is not all that we are, because we are not a what, we are ultimately a who. And so the what in us, the erotic desire, is trying to get us to the who, where all words, how would you say, all words are completed. There's nothing more to say. There's nothing that needs to be said. You're in the who, in whom you have your being. Matthew?
So, if I'm remembering the ending of Mark correctly, that when the women went to the tomb, right, and they were seized with fear and they were amazed. And then the young man at the tomb in white told them to go and tell the disciples. They were not able to say anything.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. All these little details, you know, you read them outside of a theological vision, and you just kind of glide over them. Oh yeah, they were so straight. Just like when I think I've seen a ghost. I can't talk. That must have been what it was like. Well, today in the gospel, we're going to be talking about a man who lived with the ghosts. You know, the Gerasene demoniac. And everybody was afraid of him. But when he's healed, and the townspeople come out and see him sitting, clothed in his right mind, at the feet of Jesus, what happens to them? Remember? They're seized with fear. I think it's beautiful. There's the fear of the ghosts and the demons, and then there's the fear of God. So in the resurrection, our fear of the boogies, which we I don't know what Halloween is all about. I wonder if Halloween is a Freudian, you know, way of dealing with our fear of the dark. So we make fun of it. You know, we make costumes. We become darkness ourselves. That gives us some measure of control, perhaps, over the darkness, so that we don't have to pretend we're not so scared of it. But we are scared of it, and that fear has been replaced in the church with the fear of the resurrection. I think it's beautiful. That's yes. So when you read it theologically, all of these little details then begin to pop out at you. They couldn't speak. Well, of course they couldn't speak. What was there to say?
But is it the fear of the resurrection or the hope of the resurrection?
Oh no! Come on, Martin. Read the text. They were afraid.
Yeah, they were.
At the resurrection. But
maybe they were afraid because they didn't know what was happening.
No, they were afraid because they were in the presence. They were in the You answer the question for yourself. You come into the presence of the resurrection, really, and you tell me what the fear is. I would suggest, what's the fear of the ghosts? It's the fear of being destroyed. And how would you describe the fear of the ghost compared to the fear of the resurrection? The fear of the resurrection holds within it, I would say, the promise of hope, of life. Here's the fear of death, of just being dissolved into nothing. Here's the fear I don't know, how would you even describe it? But the two fears each lead in a different direction. The one leads into the darkness and into death and into oblivion. The other leads into the light and into life and into joy. Anyway. So, with this theological vision, we don't, and the icon of Christ, who is, as we have said, in an Orthodox temple built from the ground up, would be at the very top of the ceiling, and he'd be overshadowing the whole temple. The temple is an image of the world, so it's showing how God is overshadowing the whole world. We have the icon of Christ, and what does it say? That which is. Is that what it says? No, it says he who is. He who is. So, in this theological vision, theological vision of our being, this theological ontology. Theo, God, logos, Christ. So in this vision of who we are, what we are, in the light of true theology, which is the Word of God, which is Christ, we are given to see this wonder. And honestly, I feel that if one would soak in this vision and try to really come into the presence of this vision, and not just treat it as an idea. As an idea, I think is pretty exciting. But if you could work on getting beneath even the whatness of this idea, and really, and follow where this idea is wanting to take you, which is into the presence of God, of the Word. I think that you would discover that in this vision you feel a certain fear. There's a certain fear that begins to seize you. And for one thing, we're in the presence of God. And look at me. I'm not worthy to be in the presence of God. And so I may be like Peter, depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. That was Peter's prayer. But was it the prayer of his heart? If it was the prayer of his heart, do you think the Lord would have stayed? So I don't think it was the prayer of his heart. It was the prayer of the fear that was seizing him. But deeper than the fear was a longing to be made worthy. To, I mean, you know, I would suggest as well that the fear of the resurrection is because it's not that the Lord just stays risen and I'm over here and I just look on and wonder at all. You understand, the Lord is risen from the dead. He's risen from my dead heart. So that means that he has become one with me. And that means that in his resurrection, he is calling me to become one with him. So I think part of the fear of the resurrection is the fear of becoming one with him, because I'm going to become one with him. I mean, there's so much in me that needs to be made well. I don't have any clue how to make myself. I don't know how to get over there. So I think part of the fear is that the heart knows that I'm being called not just to stay here and look on and wonder at all. I'm being called to unite myself to him in his death and resurrection and become holy. I mean, just the thought of it's fearsome. John, from you had your hand up.
Well, I was just thinking about the resurrection in the New Testament, and just thinking about like ontology and like being a body in a physical world, is that we tend to think of, like, you know, so the idea of like the principle of our being, or like the thing that is supporting our lives.
Yes.
Like today we can understand that very clearly in the mechanics of it, apart from God, apart from Christ, right?
Yes.
And so there is a way in which we're a little bit removed from part of this theological vision, because, you know, those who were Jews coming to the tomb of Christ, I mean, they're filled with the imagery, the theology in the imagery of the Old Testament, which is that on the one hand, man, like God breathed life into man and brought him into being. And on the other hand, is when we look at the material world, there's a sense of like, well, but we also wither like grass. You know, the Psalms are full of this. You know, what am I, God? Have you abandoned me? Because it seems like I'm just part of this state of flux and change and that kind of thing. So there are those two, kind of a tension between those two things. And it seems like we today, this is just a hunch, but I feel like we today have to figure out a way to like recover that, because otherwise we think it's like, well, the reason I'm alive is because, you know, my heart beats and in more of like a scientific kind of matter of fact way, as opposed to this like, wow, there's wonder at being alive, and I'm sustained by something that's beyond nature.
Yes.
You know, that's even beyond nature.
The central image of the prophets in the Old Testament was of God as the bridegroom and of Israel as the bride, which is pretty intimate.
It's a little richer than molecules.
It's a little richer. And it's also, you see, it's centered on the who? And on the love of the bride for her bridegroom, the bridegroom for the bride. So yeah, you've nailed it on the head, that this is this mechanical, however you want to describe it, way of thinking of ourselves and of the world. This is how we are shaped in the schools. From, I don't know how early, up into graduate school, and even into theology, even go to seminary. I mean, it is so, we are so immersed in it that you go to a seminary, and we treat the theological mystery of the church as a what? And if our mind, if you will, is not centered on the altar, well, then the mind's default mode of going into the what will never be challenged. And we will continue to think in terms of the what. The beauty of Orthodox theology, I think that I was thinking in terms of the what for years. I converted from from the evangelical church into the Orthodox church. I was, in so many ways, I was still evangelical. It took me, I'm still being reshaped. But I started out, I would say, I remember saying to Father Meindorf, I figured out what the essence of the Christian faith is. It's the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, in the flesh. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But Father Meindorf hesitated, wasn't quite comfortable with it. And I couldn't, and that struck me. But now I understand. I don't know if he could have said why he was uncomfortable with it. I don't know, perhaps he could, but I understand now why he was. It's because intuitively he knew, he felt, that what I was doing was reducing the whole apparatus of the church's theology to a what? Accept this idea, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, come in the flesh, and you've got Orthodoxy. No. No. But that idea, that proclamation, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and it works on the mind. If you want to take it seriously, it's going to work on you. And eventually, it's going to break your mind down, and you're going to realize, wait a minute, what does that mean? Jesus Christ. And somehow, step by step, process by process, your mind breaks down, and voila, the curtain's open, the royal door is open, and voila, you see. No, the essence of the Orthodox faith is union with God, heart to heart. And out of that union, now we go out into the world and proclaim, yes, this Jesus is the Son of God come in the flesh. But that proclamation isn't all there is. That proclamation is meant to draw you to the beauty that is hiding in that proclamation, and the beauty of it you can't talk about. So the beauty of this vision is that it shows us that each one, the whole world, each one of us, Jeremiah the prophet, in the Septuagint, the translation, I've quoted this 100 million times. The heart is deep beyond all things, and it is the man. So the heart is the who. So it's telling us, it's showing us that in your heart, you are more than your body. You're more even than your soul. More than your emotions, more than your feelings, more than your thoughts. There's something about you that's deeper than all of that. It is the heart. It's beyond all things. It's beyond all words. It's beyond all whats. That's your who. Now listen closely and you hear how in all of this talk, we cannot get outside the realm of the what. Everything I'm saying, I'm always talking about the who in terms of the what. You can't talk about the who except in terms of the what. But that's the limitations that we're under. But you can, in even in talking about the who, the heart, in terms of a what, I would guess that you can feel yourselves there's a tug in you. There's something in you that's responding. Oh, that sounds beautiful. I want to know more about it. So it's like this talk of the what. It's the church's call to us. It is calling beyond our mind, beyond our emotions, our feelings, and it's calling down into that depth, the heart, where we are deep beyond all things, and where we came into being in the image of God. We came into being as whos. In the who. So that in your heart, in your who, you're beyond all things. You're a created person. But in your creaturely who, you are somehow in the who. You are in the beyond. So you see how this, I don't know how to diagram this. Okay? You're going to have to do your best to see what I'm trying to say. You see how in your depths, it's like in your heart is the Holy of Holies. And God is there. But the Holy of Holies does not contain God. It's filled with God, but God spills out over it, if you will, because he's uncreated. But in the Holy of Holies of your heart, you're in God. And this is how we came into being. You see how we came into being? In communion with God. So understand, if the beginning determines the end, if the beginning determines how things develop and where they're going to go, if this is the beginning, where you come into being as a who, in communion with the who, small w with capital W, if that's the beginning, it determines what is the mystery of creation? How are you going to see creation? How are you going to understand creation? How are you going to understand yourself? What is your destiny? What is your end? You see how perverse even is this notion that chaos is the beginning. No. Okay, but I want to bring this home too. Is Christ? This is going to be kind of a tricky question. Is Christ the beginning? He's the beginning of us, because in Christ we came to be. As I say, this is going to be a bit dicey. It's going to have to be where we're walking a very thin line here. But is Christ the beginning? I know it says in Revelations, I am the first, I am the last, I am the beginning and the end. I know that. And that's all true. But in terms of the doctrine of the Trinity, is Christ the beginning? Who's the beginning?
He's the way to the Father.
The Father is the beginning. And the reason I'm bringing this up because it's so important, because listen, if this is breaking your mind, if this is stretching your mind beyond the breaking point, well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't stop. Because Christ is in the Father. The Father is the beginning of Christ. I mean, Christ is begotten of the Father timelessly before all things. Christ is of one essence with the Father. There was never a time when the Son was not. But Christ has a cause. He has a source. It's the Father. And the Father is the who. So you can't talk about the Father. And really, you can't even talk about Christ. But you can see Christ. You can commune with Christ. And in Christ, you become one with the Father. So what this tells us, this theological vision, what it tells us is that everything is rooted not just in one who, Christ, but in a communion of who's, the Holy Trinity. So that the whole creation is Trinitarian in its principle. And we are somehow Trinitarian. You know, we're personal. We're whose. That's the mystery of our being. Dan, you had a question?
Well, as we've been talking about it, I just keep thinking of in the big hands that instead of, the figures will just gesture.
Yes, yes. The figures will just gesture, yes. Yeah. And many times I never cover it. Because this is holy. Okay, we need to get upstairs. So I'll just close with this then. We'll have to call this to close. So we've somewhat described the structure, the form of being as configured in who's. But we also said earlier that the who, just in what it is in movement, moving out of oneself into the other. So can you see how the world comes to be? So in its coming to be, the world is in movement. but it is coming to be from out of this mystery of the Holy Trinity, the mystery of three whos, in the one who of God the Son, by the command of the who of the Father, in the living waters of the who of the Holy Spirit. Come on. What's the movement of that coming to be going to be in its essence? To revert back to philosophical language. It's going to be love. So that the world is in movement. It's in this movement of love. And I'm thinking that this is the movement of time. Time, or the movement of... So that in a theological vision, we see that the world is not governed by the movement. That time is... There's a time that's measured by the sun and the moon, the movement of sun and moon. But there's a deeper time. And we come upon that deeper time in the liturgical cycle of the church, where we do not, where the liturgical cycle does not move according to the sun and the moon, although some feasts are determined by the moon, but it's not the principle of the feast. Rather, the liturgical cycle is moving according to the movement of God descending to earth, and of man in the person of the Holy Virgin ascending to God. So the descending movement of God's erotic love coming out of himself to us, and the ascending movement of our erotic love coming out of ourselves to God. And if you look at the sweep of time in these terms, you see that this is how time has been moving from the beginning to now, centered on the incarnation and on the Sabbath rest of God. Which is to say that, St. Paul says to the Ephesians, we move and you have the statue of the unknown God. Well, I'm here to tell you about the unknown God. He's the one in whom you move and have your being, as your own philosophers have said, he says to them. Well, of course he's the unknown God. You're trying to find him in terms of what he is. I'm here to tell you about him, but I can't really tell you about him, because he's a who. But I want you to know that it's not so much learning a new physics or a new geometry in order to discover this new God that I'm going to tell you about. It's really just learning how to look at what's right in front of you. And that's what we were doing the last 2 Sundays. I was trying to get you to learn how to look right in front of you. And I had Megan try to describe Dan without telling us what he was. And then the Sunday before that, I had Dan just tell us how he could not tell his parents who Megan was until he met her. Well, you understand that immediately. It's your own experience. So, this is all, it's not like learning a new science. It's simply learning how to see over here what's right in front of us. And learning to experience creation not in terms of what it is, but in terms of the mystery of Christ as the who is begotten of the who of the Father, and in whom we have come to be, not as what's, but as who's. All right. Well, let's close it there, because I do need to get upstairs and get going on that.
Well, Andrew did say, "Come and see."
Very good. Very good. I was sharing with the choir last night that perhaps the chief verb of the Old Testament would be hearing. The chief verb of the New Testament would be seeing. But you can't see until you've listened.
Yeah.
And that's why that was his chief complaint to the Pharisees, was it not? You've read the prophets, but you've not heard a word that they said. If you had heard them, you would see me.
Yeah, I know.
So it's a matter of learning to listen, learning to see what's right in front of you. Okay.